We're very happy now to have Vice President Mike Pence with us. You know, you have to follow Hannity, Mr. Vice President, so that's just the way it works.
Good to be with you, Laura.
It's so great to see you tonight for a live interview, and it's late. I understand you've had a very long day. You see this narrative taking hold, though. You have cases rising across the country. This is the media's narrative. Schools are waffling on opening. Governors are pulling back on some of their reopening, especially in blue states. And the American people are giving the administration mixed marks on the handling of the virus, even though the handling of the virus has been so much better in so many ways in red state America than it has been in blue state America. So what do you have to do to convince voters, especially in middle America, that you're doing this right, Mr. Vice President?
Well, look, I think the American people have seen this president take decisive action from very early in the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, Laura, before there was a single case of community transmission, before the end of January, President Trump suspended all travel from China, stood up the White House coronavirus task force, and in the first few weeks of February, we actually began the process of developing a vaccine. And you just heard a week ago that we're already at a historic pace in phase 3 clinical trials of the first coronavirus vaccine for this country, could well be available for this fall. In the midst of all of that, we've taken testing from a standing start to nearly 60 million coronavirus tests performed. PPE is in great abundance, even across the areas of the country where we've seen rising cases, and working closely with governors, as the president and I have from the very beginning. Not only did we confront the dramatic rise in cases, the crisis that emerged in New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, then Detroit, New Orleans, but the good news, as the president said today, is we're already beginning to see across the Sun Belt not only a stabilization of cases, but cases are declining, emergency room visits are declining, and we're going to work closely with states all across the heartland. I think at the end of the day, the American people know this president has spared no expense. He's marshaled not only a whole of government response to the coronavirus pandemic, but a whole of America response, and it's all just evidence of the kind of leadership that President Trump has brought for this country over the last 3.5 years. And I'm ready to take the story of this pandemic, but also the story of the way this economy is already recovering on the foundation President Trump poured in the first 3 years. We've already put 7 million Americans back to work in the first 2 months of a recovery. And
I want to get to that in a second.
We're working to open up our schools.
I want to get to that in a second. But states like Florida and Texas are still doing much better on COVID than New York. I mean, that's just, look at the numbers per million. Like, what is that, factor of 5 or 6? But earlier today, Governor Cuomo had the gall to say this about the Trump administration's handling of the virus. Watch.
We do need a reset, but the reset has to start at the top. We have confusion, we have chaos, we don't have operations set up. And I think it has to start with the President of the United States. I think he has to stand up and say what he didn't say 6 months ago. He has to say to the American people that COVID is serious. The White House, Dr. Birx, the Secretary, they're sending the exact wrong message. They've learned nothing in 6 months.
You've learned nothing in 6 months. Your response to Governor Cuomo, 32,000 dead in New York.
Well, our hearts grieve for the fact that 1 in 5 of all the American lives have been lost in the coronavirus pandemic. Were lost in the state of New York, and some of that was because of poor decisions by the state and by Governor Cuomo. But look, I liked it better when he said that President Trump's leadership in the pandemic was, in his words, phenomenal. He said that repeatedly as we surged testing, as we surged PPE, as we sailed in a hospital ship, as we built hospitals in New York. I couldn't be more proud of the support that we rendered to the people of New York. And I think the people of New York know that. Healthcare workers know that. Families know that. I know that Governor Phil Murphy, just across the river, has continued to express his great appreciation for President Trump's leadership. But I have to tell you, there'll be plenty of time in the future to debate various responses. Laura, our focus is entirely on dealing with this pandemic, marshaling the full resources of the government, but I think the American people know the facts here. And the fact that Governor Cuomo has been on again, off again. He's complimented the administration's response, and then he pivots to criticism. I think people see through that. It's just
I want
politics.
to get to mail-in ballots.
But we're going to stay focused on the task at hand, and that is saving lives, protecting the vulnerable, and putting this coronavirus in the past.
Mail-in ballots, sir, are a looming disaster. We're seeing this in New York, of course, and I foresee a scenario where President Trump could actually be ahead in key states on election night, but those states couldn't have counted all the mail-in ballots. Philadelphia, Detroit, Milwaukee, Miami-Dade, you could foresee a situation where this would go on for weeks. What can you say tonight to assure us that this election will not be stolen by Democrat election officials in swing states?
Well, look, the president made it very clear, whether it's the power grab in Nevada that the president or the governor of Nevada was signing that allowed not only for universal mail-in ballots, but also vote harvesting, as it's called. We're headed to the courts. Look, the right to vote, the one person, one vote right, is at the very center of our democracy. And the president's made it very clear that we're not going to stand idly by while you see, Democrat states and Democrat governors use the backdrop of the coronavirus to send millions of ballots all across their states and all across this country. Let's be clear, though, Laura, absentee balloting is perfectly acceptable. You have to apply for an absentee ballot. Signatures are checked. It's confirmed. It has a long tradition. And we want to encourage any American that is not able to go to the polling place for any reason to apply for an absentee ballot today. But this universal mail-in voting where you're going to see literally ballots showered all across the state, it is ripe for fraud, and we are headed straight to the courts to put a stop to it.
Mr. Vice President, we really appreciate your joining us tonight. We had a lot other more questions, but we'll have to have you come back real soon, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Good